Hello. So very cool to see Dell do a VR video. That was awesome. I agree with both Robert and Dell's observations about those sessions. Brilliant. So this I want to talk about in this GM Talk video. I want to talk a little bit about what is it that is what is it that one might think is wholly different in their game mechanics or their style of adjudication or their style of gameplay that they think is wholly different than what we may be doing in Dark Age of Man, or what we may think is wholly different than what our peers or contemporaries are doing in their games. Whether it's true or not, who knows? It's all arguable, right? So I just want to talk about, first I want to talk about, again, what creates an opportunity for the GM, one of the players at the table, who happens to be in the seat of referee, game master, dungeon master, whatever, GM, DM, presenter in our game, etc. A player in that process. I think some games they are indeed aided in the process of being a player, or they're restricted in the process as to have to be held accountable to the resource management of the game. And I think these are good things. I think these are unique and innovative changes to many of our choices for tabletop role-playing games. And I speak wholly, mostly in my experience, to 2D20, Conan, 2D20, Star Trek Adventures. And in this part of the game, the role-playing game portion of it, is this process in which the players can utilize or activate a resource in a risk-reward. The irony is they can activate the resource in an opportunity to minimize risk of failure or maximize risk of success, but in doing so, pay a resource to the GM, who then can later turn around and utilize that same resource as a tool in session, right? To create complications or to place in play greater threats, right? That's why it's called threat or doom, right? Okay, so to give an example of why this works in Conan, right, versus and how I think this is incredibly important about why I think 2D20 is, in this sense, masterful. Let's just go with the first Conan book, right? The first Tower of the Elephant, right? He works his way into the courtyard. He faces a lion, right? That may or may not have been there. Let's say it's a module, and there's the lion, there's the tiger is the watchdog, and Conan dispatches it quickly. Conan then makes the decision to climb the tower. I can't remember right offhand whether he deals with the guard, but let's assume he does, right? These are all basic things you would expect to be in the tower guarding the thing Conan was there to steal, right? But for me, for that to be high adventure, for that to be Conan, for Doom to be legitimized in 2D20, the GM utilizes any Doom he has available to him based on how the game starts or based on what the players have already done to guarantee they don't fall when they climb the tower, or to guarantee they kill the tiger in one bear hug, right? I think in the book, if I remember right, Conan has dispatched this tiger instantly. I mean, we're talking high adventure. This is not roll initiative, check your D20, check your D20, check. They don't have an epic fight. He does not have an epic fight with a tiger. He kills the tiger almost instantly. This has been one of my arguments against why I don't think D20 can do high adventure. But I've had this argument before, and it's just personal. It's just my take. There wouldn't be a roll for initiative, and we're going to fight the tiger, right? There is this epicness in which Conan deals with that situation in a high adventure, heroic way. Okay. Later, top of the tower, GM uses his Doom to invent the spider with the paralyzing crystal eye, right? If I'm remembering exactly the details of the elephant, Tower of the Elephant. That to me is a perfect example of the expenditure of Doom, right? Maybe in the module, it's just another guard, or maybe in the module it's just a very difficultly locked case, or maybe in the module it's a trap. Well, maybe we spin Doom and create this spider with a crystal eye that paralyzes, right? And now we have an epic high adventure combat between Conan, in which there will be exchange of dice rolls in this epic fight with this creature. Okay, that's to me, the perfect example of why 2D20 Conan has potential play space features that make the GM a player, and also they have to share the space with the players in a resource management way. Now, granted, that creates some metagaming, etc., but that's gaming, right? You can't. It's just the way it is. Star Trek, same thing, right? We get this opportunity for players to decide with risk reward immediately how important is this immediate challenge that I want to have success at, that I will borrow momentum, or I will spend momentum, I will buy momentum from the GM in it, but for the ultimate gamble that you're giving power to the GM later, right? As opposed to the GM in D&D using fiat and just creating whatever the hell he wants to create when he wants to create it, or having written it in a module to be the thing. So there is a difference, and there are those GMs who would say, I don't need to be given the ability to do this. I can do this to keep the game fun for the guys. Well, of course. I mean, that's 50 years of gaming. Who's to argue, right? Can't argue with that. Been doing it for 50 years. So, but it changes the space in which the player as GM gets to be a player as GM. And I think it creates this give and take risk-reward gamble type system that's a further game between the players and the GM. And I don't mean that in an adversarial way, right? I mean that in the players have a choice. How bad do I want to succeed at this? And I know what it's going to cost me to do so. I'm going to give the GM the thing he needs to make this more interesting, to make this a Star Trek episode. Okay. Now, from there, what happens with that? The GM creates a Klingon off the starboard bow, just comes out of warp. A Romulan decloaking off the port side. A planet on the edge of this particular solar system explodes, just explodes, wreaking havoc upon the system, sending asteroids and planet pieces. And now we've got a mystery. What the hell happened? How did that planet explode? We got a mystery, but we're also dealing with this epic explosion of a planet that could affect other planets and civilizations, etc. Okay. The GM creates this with threat, right? I don't know again, I don't have the book in front of me. I haven't looked at the book in 2 years, so I don't know what the GM's allowed to create based on his resources. Okay. The gist of it is this. If I am GMing Star Trek 2D20 and I know the initial setup is they're here to talk to these people about their water supply. Meanwhile, I use threat, like the episode, to create Klingons on the opposite side of the planet in which a player has failed a scan check. He has not failed to scan the planet. He has not failed to do his job. But that failure cues me that I can use some of my threat to invent Klingons that he did fail to scan, right? And that doesn't have to be in the book, right? It empowers me through resources to now complicate the whole session, right? Now it's not just figuring out what the hell's wrong with the water supply, how are we going to help these people, what do we do? We also can't just, whatever. But now they're going to have to contend with the fact that Klingons are here, right? We have complicated the entire episode. Not to mention we got a water supply problem for the people on the planet below, okay? This to me is the random monster event. This is the random event chart. This is the wandering monster chart. Or to compare this to what we do in our game, this is the random seed generator. So when someone says, well, Jason, your GM fiat, you can just write that, you can just do that, you can just make that. Well, our goal in our game is to reduce the presenter to not knowing. Our goal in our game is to reduce the presenter to being a player, someone who is sharing this space. Meanwhile, I have a job to do, I have a role to do, and that is to generate threat, but via a random chart that I have no control over. So the random chart I may have written, the random chart might be provided by a module or a campaign book, the random charts. But I literally start the session with a random seed, right? Whatever the setup is, that's legit. We're here to fix the water supply of the planet. So let's say we're playing Star Trek of Man, right? We're playing the Star Trek version, Dark Age of Man, Star Trek version. In ours, they would be there to do that thing, and then I would roll that random seed, and it might say Klingons appear opposite side of planet. Bingo. I've just generated this threat, but I did it via the rules, via a random chart. Now, the difference between our game and that game is we can introduce new random seeds as the players either eliminate one, or as the players ignore one, or as the players travel, or as the players succeed at one. I can continue for the sake of energy, for the sake of the organic play, poof, roll that chart and put some other threat around or in front of the players. So when someone says to me, well, you guys are just making shit up, I say to you, no, we're using threat. We're using doom. We're using wandering monsters. We're using random event tables. No different than if you write it or if you use those other devices to create a thing, right? If the presenter plays within our rules as a player, our rules state have a random seed chart. It has to be weighted in difficulty, roll it to start the session, and then you can roll it as needed, right? We identify that there is rules to this thing. Now, whether it is vague, we recommend a vague description because we don't want the GM to know totally. We want the GM to say, this is interesting. How I present this will set some rules, but also how the players perceive this will then inform the GM to continue on a particular path, right? And it's a give-take relationship, not unlike momentum, threat, momentum, threat, momentum, threat, right? Okay. The difference is in our game, you're using momentum as a direct effect upon task resolution, on activity resolution, on mechanic resolution, and you're exchanging for those opportunities, maybe giving more power to the GM at a later date or in the same scene, etc., etc. Okay, creating complications, variables, whatever. Okay, so I think it's a fascinating thing to say. Well, what is our random seed generator really? Right? It is a generation of threat. It is a generation of doom, right? We generate doom, we generate threat. It does not generate positive effects. It does not generate, but it can generate innocuous things that become remarkably important, right? In last session, I rolled 2 monks and a soldier at a campfire. I put them on the by the river in the middle of the night as they were traveling, and they bump into these. They were innocuous, they were just this monks and a soldier traveling. I don't know where they're going. I don't know why they're there. And then it takes shape as I identify it, as the players make decisions about it. It can become real or not real or true. Either way, we have an encounter, right? Okay. So the gist of what I'm saying is how much of what we think we do different is really not that different than other games. And how much of what you think you do different is that much different than what we do. So for us, we step back and say, well, we definitely are trying to create player agents. We're trying to give the players the ability to assess and decide how they want to engage in their own decision-making choices as their options to resolve or to pursue the next step forward, as opposed to me, GM, leading you to the dungeon door and then making you go through the dungeon door. We are providing a world in which we say, there's a dungeon door there. What do you want to do about it? And Joe says, well, I really don't. I want to go around the top and drop through the back of the, I'm going to go look for another way into this dungeon. I'm not going through the front door of this dungeon. And now we end up on an adventure as they travel around the mountain looking for a back door to the dungeon. And the adventure is far greater than the hole in the ground, right? So we want players to have the agency to decide the value based on their characters, based on their motivations, etc. The value of the mystery and which mysteries need resolving and which mysteries they can resolve a different way. Prime example the other night, Seamus is supposed to signal the boat. Dell talks about this in his last video. Signal the boat to them in the inlet. Signal the boat that it's safe to come ashore. They never get that signal. A Viking boat floats by. They panic. They go further downstream. They dock, and they realize we don't know where Seamus is at. That's a mystery. But I think we just head toward Don Patrick, and we make an effort to find somebody there who can help us with what Seamus was supposed to do for us, whatever the case may be. They found the way to resolve it. They didn't have to pursue Seamus not showing up. They did not have to make that mystery the goal, right? They resolved it like human beings should resolve their lives. I have a flat tire. I have a couple of choices. I can fix the flat tire, or I can walk down to the gas station, or I can sit in my car, or I could call State Patrol. I mean, I got all kinds of ways to deal with a flat tire, right? Hopefully you're going to deal with it the way it's the best possible route. Flip the trunk open, get out your spare tire, and change your tire. But there could be a multitude of reasons why you can't do that. No spare tire, no tools, whatever the case may be. You've broke your hand, and you don't have a hand, whatever the case may be. But there's a multitude of ways in which we can actually resolve our flat tire of our car. So I want players to feel that way in the session the whole time. I want players to know it's not so much they invent fixes. They don't invent things. They don't make conclusions. And that's one of the things we talked about last night. Brian and Dell and I had a brilliant talk for God, 4 hours last night, 3 hours last night, talking about all kinds of things and sharing all kinds of things. But one of the things we discussed, and I'm saying I'm learning about this process, why we're playtesting this process, is how to recognize potential problems, how to recognize this is the thing we maybe need to define. Are players allowed to make certain conclusions? And therefore, if they are, to what end? And if they're not, how do we define it, right? And is it okay if all those conclusions be iffy? Is it okay if they make a conclusion and I demand a luck check to prove it, right? Could that become part of the process of the game that's demanded of the presenter anytime a player makes a conclusion, right? I conclude the door is open. It's not locked. And I go, okay, well, he's just decided the fate of the locked door without a challenge. I can create a challenge by just saying, really? Well, let's check your luck. Is it indeed, right? So it becomes then an opportunity to say you must prove that conclusion true, so to speak. So it's just made me realize too how really different are these games. Well, mechanically, yes. Rules, yes. How they're acquired, how you acquire Doom and Threat, and how you spend Doom and Threat, and how the players are part of that process, right? Those make that system different. They make those mechanics different. They make those things special. How a GM uses them depends solely on the module, depends solely on what's been prepared or written, or depends solely on how they want to use the aesthetic of Star Trek to create a Romulan ship decloaking off the port bow. Making shit up, but using a resource to do that, right? Because again, there is this idea that that Del and I are just making shit up, and well, no, we are processing a scene we see in our head, and we are trying to make intelligent decisions about the process of the making shit up. And indeed, we all make shit up, whether, again, I've said this before, whether it was written in a module 10 years ago, Gary Gygax or whoever writes a module for advanced D&D, White Plume Mountain, if you don't think all of that was made up and then applied and put in writing, just becomes a rule. The minute it's written down, it becomes a rule. Now, will the GM follow those rules, or will the GM tweak those rules, or will they become rulings over rules? Again, we've been doing this stuff for 50 years, right? Can't be wrong, right? Can't be misunderstood. Can't be misrepresented, could it? No. Of course it can, and of course it is. And of course that we attach to it the rights and the wrongs, the bests and the worst. I disagree with those things, right? I disagree with those things. But I will say the process is not so different as a game mechanic or game mechanism for Dark Age of Man. The process is going to be different how much we ask the players to fill in the holes. We ask the players to decide how they want to move forward, how they want to resolve, how they want to investigate, how they want to achieve, as opposed to I'll tell you and then you make this roll. I'll tell you and you get two choices, right or left. I'll tell you and then I'm going to demand you make a console check to scan the planet because it's demanded of the rules or because it's part of the process of control, versus you guys arrive in System B, there's 4 planets here, and the first thing the captain player says to the navigator or to their science officer behind them looking in the machine, tell me about this solar system. Then he makes a dice roll. He says, yes, sir, and he makes a dice roll to do so. And then the GM imparts the pertinent information that any competent science officer could do via the tools he has, regardless of the pass-fail. The fail creates an opportunity for a Romulan to be off-screen, off-scan that he failed to see, or failed to notice the Romulans that were, or the civilization had been adversely affected by an earthquake, wasn't necessarily in the scan of the planet. They're not aware that it's been, decimated because he failed that piece of the roll. So this is the joy of our game. This is the joy of our hobby. This is the joy of how we do this thing. This is the joy of how rules complicate this thing. It's the joy of how we interpret those rules, and then how we communicate with the players and how we activate these things. Star Trek Adventures to me, 2D20 does capture Star Trek almost perfectly to me, as someone who has enjoyed Star Trek 2D20. I thought Conan did a great job with certain aspects of 2D20. There were some aspects in which I thought the game was slowed down to where it doesn't quite have the pace of high adventure that I anticipate all of my Conan-type games to have. But again, that's also the nature of the mechanics of the game. But it doesn't create that aesthetic of high adventure via the way the GM prepares the game, the way the players bring characters to this setting, and then of course the use of momentum to be successful Conan, to be a successful wizard, a successful thief, but at the same time empower the GM to rattle the cavern with a soft earthquake that drops boulders about their feet as they run to escape. High adventure, certainly, right? So anyway, these are the things that I think we're too quick to dismiss based on the either the size of the rule book, the depth of the rule book. We're too quick to dismiss on how many mechanisms exist in the game. One of the things I told Brian last night that I had made clear to Dell, I want one mechanism. I do not want to have different mechanisms for different pieces of the game. I don't want to change dice mechanics for different parts of the game. I don't want to activate different mechanisms based on how players play. I don't want to have a combat dice mechanism and then we have also a skill dice mechanism, and I wanted one simple mechanism to resolve all conflicts exactly the same way. And some games do have multiple mechanisms, right? They switch gears to go into the journey rules, which is a different die 12, different charts, different thing, and then they go back to the one ring rules for the combat or the skill checks, etc. So we end up with different mechanisms that are in the book depending on players changing gears. We're now going from narrating our walk through the city to narrating our travel on the road, but we have to go from a different narrative mechanical tool to resolve bartering with the blacksmith to now a whole new set of rules and dice for the journey across the state, right? So these are things that when you sit down to write and develop a game, you say, well, what is it we want to do? It's not right or wrong. It's not better or worse. It's what do we want our game to do? What do we want our game to ask of the players? What kind of workload do we want to put on our players? What kind of workload do we want to put on our GMs? And if we do, and we understand that development process and the psychological process of what this will do for players and GMs when they sit down to say, let's play this game, let's try this game, whatever, what is that? What is their trigger points to recognize it, whether it's a game or it's a pretense, or whether it's a competitive game or a cooperative game, or whether it's a GM game or GM-less game, etc., etc., etc. And so there are certain mechanisms that are shared, although we derive them from another angle. For instance, threat is you use a resource of threat to spend those points to as a GM to create a event or create a thing. We use a chart that is weighted and it's a random check. So the fiat for the GM is, when do I roll those dice, right? I could roll 3 in a row and make sure that all 3 of these things start to unfold before the players. So again, we don't, in that sense, we're not as strict about how often that chart's rolled. And we put the GM in a situation where he can't control the difficulty, right? He could roll a 3, which is catastrophic. He could roll a 13, which is pretty pedestrian, pretty basic, right? The king's administrator has gone missing. It's innocuous, right? It's a mystery. Or dragon attacks castle, right? I mean, so totally the threat. I don't dictate the quality of the threat. The dice dictate the quality of the threat. So fun for us as a presenter to go, wow, this is neat. I become a naive narrator, naive player, and I get this thing put before me that I now have to work out the process of how do I present this to the players, and then the players have to decide how they're going to deal with this, how they're going to resolve this. Are they going to run away? Are they going to try to fight it? Are they going to just hide for cover? Are they going to amass an army? I mean, this is the joy of allowing the players the agency to resolve or to even prioritize what they give a rat's butt about, right? And so these are the places we're at in our playtest. These are the places we're at when I look back and I say, well, what is it about those games I don't want our game to be? Or what is it about those processes I don't want to ask the players to go through? What is it about those devices that actually change the table space for better or worse? And I think, and I mean from the standpoint of what we're trying to achieve for our players in our system. I don't mean worse as in threats, a bad idea, just the opposite. And then, of course, we're always up against the traditional, always up against the most popular. We're always up against the brand. We're always up against the thing that everybody does or talks about or has done. And with that comes the baggage, comes the preconceived ideas of the process in which is proper to do the thing we call role playing. I would beg to differ. There is no one way, right? I would beg to differ. There is no right way necessarily, right? I would beg to say the rules should impart a particular style of play based on the mechanisms and how the game asks players to engage in it. So, okay, thanks for listening. Good day. Bye-bye.